themselves in this position. They've got to find a way to dig themselves out. I think the biggest thing that's got overlooked out of all of this is because of the 3 or 4 times where Roy Williams has sounded off. And he's sounded off a few times after Georgia Tech. He dropped the F-bomb a couple weeks ago. He still has remained positive. And you've heard that echoed by the players, the staff that you're watching the TV show on ACC Network. He still believes in this team, which has given this team a reason to continue to believe in themselves despite the amount of heartbreaking losses. A couple things that they did really well in this game. You gotta love 25 assists on 33 made baskets. That's Carolina basketball in a nutshell offensively. The ball's being shared. That means the ball's being moved. You gotta love they were 11 of 26 from 3. I thought they got a little 3-point happy late in the first half when Syracuse closed back in. But you could somewhat understand it because when you're making them, you're going to continue to shoot them. But I also thought they did a good job of when the threes quit falling, getting back to what you got to do, attacking the zone, giving it to Garrison Brooks in the middle, and going from there. And then they dominated the glass. Syracuse doesn't have a lot of size, but sometimes the zone is a good way to negate a great rebounding team like Carolina is again this year. Heels plus 10. So everything that they had to do to give themselves a chance to do, they did, and they exceeded well. Anything from you from the Syracuse game before we move on to looking ahead to Wake Forest?
No. I did want to mention that it was pointed out to me, but I'm not. I don't remember seeing him come back into the game. And unfortunately, the staff broadcast was not out there, so I cannot see the substitution log. But somebody said that Christian Keeling came back into the game after he went down with the injury. So I'm hoping that's the truth. I don't remember seeing him come back into the game. Maybe that was just something that I missed. But it seems like there hasn't been anything released on it. And again, it was a non-contact injury, but it didn't really look like there was anything severe. It looked like he kind of just stepped and went down to the floor. So it looks like he may have avoided something big. It just seems like maybe it's just Charlie horse or just some sort of severe cramp. So that's the good news. And the other thing that I found interesting, again, and I don't know whether he was actually injured or if he just wasn't playing in the second half because Roy Williams didn't like the energy from him. Armando Bacot played 9 minutes in this game. That means that over the last 2 games, he's combined for 22 minutes total. And Justin Pierce has taken over the bulk of his minutes. Once again, Justin Pierce was not fantastic on the offensive end. He was just 2 of 7 from the field. But he did the things that he needed to do on the defensive end to continue to warrant him being on the floor. It's just it's something that I think is really interesting. And at this point, if this continues over these last few games, however many there are left in this Carolina basketball season, I think this just continues to solidify the fact that there is no doubt in my mind he'll have to come back next year, because right now he's just not doing the things that he's going to need to even have a chance to make the NBA. And that's fine. I think that if he comes back, he has a chance to be a really good player. But it seems like Justin Pierce has sort of taken over that role as the guy that's going to play alongside Garrison Brooks, because from what I've seen, he's looked a lot better next to Garrison Brooks in the last 2 games than Armando Bacot has.
Yeah, it's something that we touched on after NC State, where it was more of a blank benching. It was reported that he sprained his ankle yesterday, and that didn't return, but it wasn't like before the injury occurred. He was playing great and was probably on the way to get benched yet again. A freshman that's playing like a freshman, you can understand it. And obviously, no way he goes to the NBA, because he's not even putting up the numbers that Tony Bradley put up per 40, and he's a starter. So with that, we'll move on to Wake Forest. And this is oddly a big game. a big game because what's the next game? But Carolina is battling for NCAA tournament positioning. We don't know the status of Georgia Tech competing in the ACC tournament. You would imagine that with a week before, no word from the ACC, they're going to be allowed to compete in Greensboro in a week. So it changes up seeding. Wake Forest, of course, won the first matchup 74-57 in a game that really more invested Wake Forest team, and Carolina just got punched in the mouth and didn't have enough energy to respond. Of course, that was the game after the Duke game. You can kind of understand why that happened. This isn't the same Carolina team, but it's also the same Wake Forest team. You mentioned on 2 big wins last week. The upset Duke at home in overtime, and then they turn around and they beat Notre Dame, a team that a lot like NC State, a lot like Syracuse, is trying to fight their way, win their way into the NCAA tournament. Wake Forest knocks them off. So both teams enter on 2-game winning streaks. Ironically, that's tied for the second longest winning streak in the conference. Virginia owns the longest at 6 in a row. And Carolina trying to improve their NCAA or their ACC tournament standing, trying to climb themselves out of the cellar. Carolina finishes last in the ACC. It'll be the first time that's happened in the history of the conference. That kind of tells you historically where Carolina is. It's also senior night for Carolina. You'll be honoring Brandon Robinson and a group of seniors that were on a team that won a national championship. Not the kind of senior class we've had in years past with Joel Berry, Theo Pinson last year, Luke May, Kenny Williams, and Cam Johnson were leaving. Not as an emotional time from us as a fan base, but it's still going to be an emotional night in the Smith Center and something that Carolina's got to fight the emotions and continue their improved play of basketball.
Well, okay, so let me just describe to you how much of a complete crapshoot the ACC has been so far this year. So we were kind of talking about this a little bit last night. If Carolina was to win out, the bottom part of the ACC. So basically this is how the ACC works this year. There's a top tier, which are 4 teams that are battling to win the ACC. That's Louisville, Florida State, Virginia, and Duke. Then there's a middle tier of teams that are all at 9-9. NC State, Notre Dame, 2 teams that are fighting for NCAA tournament hopes. And then Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and Clemson, who will all likely have to win the ACC tournament. Although, believe it or not, Clemson's kind of making themselves somewhat of a little bit of a contender if they keep winning these weirdly big-time games. But that's not the case. And then you get down to this bottom tier, which is Boston College, Virginia Tech, Miami, Wake Forest, Pittsburgh, and Carolina. So Carolina can get all the way up to, if I'm thinking correctly, they can get all the way up to 11 because they cannot surpass Boston College because of the fact that Boston College beat them earlier this year. The good news is that Carolina could be 11th, which, again, you could say, well, how huge is that? I mean, I don't really think it matters because, again, like if you're just going off of right now, even if Carolina finishes in the cellar and they're the 15 seed, if they win, then they could go on to face Georgia Tech. I personally don't want any part of Georgia Tech just because we saw when we played them earlier this year that that's one of those teams that we just struggle against, and that's been something that's happened over the last few years. They're one of those teams that you just never really know when they're going to get hot, and when they do, it is almost impossible to slow down Alvarado, and that's the guy that kind of scares me the most, especially with Cole's competitiveness. You wonder if that would turn into one of those games where they're just going to start going back and forth. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Carolina, if they win this game and enough things go right, they could go from sitting in the basement to being a team that legitimately is in the hunt for that 11 seed in the ACC tournament, which would be huge. We've come to the reality that if they're going to make a run, it's going to have to be 5 games in 5 days. But Carolina needs this one against Wake Forest to continue the momentum. And I mean, you mentioned that, this is a senior night that really doesn't hold the same type of value as a lot of the recent ones have. But, I mean, there's still some guys that, are important to the program because we kind of value being that type of family that values every guy that's on the roster. And, I mean, look, Brandon Robinson has not had a fantastic year. He's probably not been as productive as people were hoping that he could be this year for a team that needed him to be that productive. But he's still a guy that, we remember early in the year fought through countless injuries in the game against State to come back in multiple times and find a way to play down the stretch to help Carolina win. That's just the type of player that he is. And that's a guy that deserves to be honored. Christian Keeling, while he didn't get off to the greatest start, is a guy that has become a really key part of this team. And even though the early part of his Carolina career, even though it's only 1 year, won't be remembered as being great, he's still a guy that we'll probably remember as a key part of a team that if they do end up making at least a significant run, even if it's to the semifinals or the championship game and they lose, he'll be part of the guy of someone that helped give this team a chance. Justin Pierce, another guy that really just wasn't all that great at times, that maybe not as good as we thought he was going to be, but has rounded into form here as of late. And then you talk about the walk-ons, guys like Shea Rush, who was a part of that team, of course, made the hats for everybody that became pretty famous during the national championship run. Caleb Ellis, just one of those guys that was a hard-working player, that really was just one of the energy guys on the bench. And then Robbie O'Han, who we all remember being a guy before the season that wasn't even on the roster. He just got called up about a week and a half before the season started from the JV team and was forced to play a role. There were times during the season where, we looked at him and said, dude, he might have to play significant minutes if we have another injury here. And, of course, had those moments against Georgia Tech where he was brought in to try to spark the team. So, again, it's one of those nights that even though you might not think it's that special, there are still guys that deserve to be honored. And I'm going to tell you, we've seen it over the last couple of games. Guys like Christian Keeling and Brandon Robinson realize that their careers are coming to an end. And I think that's going to serve some extra motivation. The key in this game, you better find a way to slow down Brandon Childress, because right now, that guy is playing with about as much heart as anybody in college basketball. And if there's a guy that, we're talking about Carolina trying to find a way to win the AC tournament. If there's a guy that could give Wake any sort of opportunity, it's him, because he wants to keep playing basketball. He wants to try to build some momentum for his team, and they're coming off 2 big wins of their own. So 2 teams that are pretty confident. Carolina's got to feed off of what should be a great home environment and find a way to get a win that will help them keep momentum before they go to Durham.
Yeah, you bring up Brandon Childress, and that's where I was going to start when we look at this game more closely. When the 2 teams played in Winston-Salem, he was the best player on the court. This is going to come across as a slight towards him, and it's not. That can't happen for Carolina to win. He is playing, like you said, a ton of hard because his career is winding down. And he's been a guy that no one really thought was ever going to be a very good ACC basketball player. Well, he's proven a lot of people wrong. He proved us wrong 2 weeks ago. If Carolina's going to win, Carolina's got to win the same way they've won the last 2 games. That's with Garrison Brooks being a grown man on the interior, and that's on both ends, as scoring the ball, rebounding the ball, making his foul shots, and Cole Anthony being the kind of point guard that we were told he was going to be, which was a complete point guard, a guy that can score, but can also hand the ball out to his teammates. A guy that can defend both individually and as a team defender. That's what Carolina's got to do. Christian Keeling has to give you something off the bench. I'm not saying he's got to keep doing what he's doing, because what he's doing off the bench is not something Carolina's used to having as a bench production kind of player in terms of his scoring these past couple games. But he's got to give you something. Justin Pierce can't kill you when he's in the game. And that's really because Carolina's got more talent. they've got the better head coach. It is senior night, so you know there's going to be a lot of